Perhaps I should start from the beginning. I was a little disgruntled when I was given an assignment in the village that's notorious for being Finland's most desolate place. Puolanka. Look it up. It is certainly not the location that comes to mind when people think of Christmas. Lapland is the popular tourist destination in Finland. I was sent to Puolanka with a cameraman to interview residents for a fluff piece about remote villages. I was a journalist from the sunny city of Los Angeles. The two places are worlds apart, and we were supposed to be there for a month, an entire month. Moreover, the month was December. I had to spend Christmas in the middle of nowhere. The year was 2005. I was a young woman. That is a good thing in the media industry. At first, however, it's a little rough. You have to do the stories that nobody wants to hear before you get to do the big ones. Those first few weeks in Puolanka were tiresome. I was bored. My cameraman Steven was bored. The residents I interviewed were bored. We were staying at a small B&B. The couple running the establishment were actually very friendly. That's why my interview with them was so unexpectedly distressing. I've left out their names for legal reasons. It's nearly Christmas Day, I said. Are there any festivities planned? The village is so quiet. Oh, the husband said, yes, Christmas Day is celebrated, but it's also feared. Feared? What do you mean? I asked, smiling at what I assumed to either be a joke or the Finnish man's broken English. I think I should warn you to treat that day differently in this village, he said. Please, Heather, make sure you and Stephen are asleep before midnight on Christmas Day. Do not wake until 6 a.m. at the earliest. Why is that? I pressed, trembling. At this point, it was only the husband's new, sinister demeanor that gave me any cause for concern. As he spoke, his breath seemed to fill the air with an icy chill. His brown eyes, which had previously seemed so warm, were filled with a blackness that haunted me to my core. We did not stir between the hours of midnight and 6 in the morning on Christmas Day, he repeated. The wife sat there, quietly. Her smile had rapidly departed her face. I wrapped up the interview, and Stephen teased me relentlessly over the next few days. What do we think? Evil Santa? Krampus? Stephen inquired, chortling. Stop it, Stephen, I scolded. I'm not scared of anything supernatural. I'm scared of him. He seemed so friendly for the first few weeks. Did you see how cold and robotic he became? Ah, they're just superstitious people, Heather, Stephen said. We'll just have to party a little more quietly in our room when the clock strikes midnight, won't we? What? I replied, gasping. You're not going to disobey his rule. I don't want that creepy couple to come in here and hack us to pieces. Stephen smiled, wrapping his arms around me. He gave me a soft peck on the forehead. You've not gone off me, have you? He asked, affectionately booping my nose. Nope. For that to happen, I'd have to fancy you, I replied, grinning. He was an asshole, and there was no doubt about that, but Stephen did have a way of putting me at ease. Our fling didn't have any real depth, but I trusted the guy. I trusted that I was just being silly. There was nothing to fear. They were just a friendly, superstitious couple. Still, that night, I saw the old man's black, haunting eyes in my dreams. I wasn't fully convinced by Stephen's words, but I tried my best to move past the uncomfortable interview. The husband returned to his pleasant self over the coming days. Christmas Eve was actually surprisingly fun. The wife cooked a feast as we were the only guests at the B&B, and the four of us danced to festive music. I decided the frightening interview had been a misunderstanding. Have you had enough to eat and drink? The wife asked later in the evening. Yeah, thanks, I replied. The meal was delicious. Thank you, dear. But it is now 9 p.m., she said. We must all go to bed. Stephen snorted with laughter. Careful, lady. I don't know you that well. I smacked him in the arm. This is later than we usually retire on Christmas Eve. We have taken a risk to give you a pleasant evening. Now, please, we must all go to sleep, the husband said curtly. I thought you said midnight, Stephen replied, swigging his drink. You must be asleep by midnight, the husband explained. I have no doubt that 3 hours is more than enough time to drift off, but it is better to err on the side of caution. I shot Stephen a look. He knew my looks well. Okay, Stephen drunkenly slurred, raising his hands. You're the man. He giggled obnoxiously as we climbed the stairs to bed, and I apologized profusely to the couple, but they shrugged it off. They understood that Stephen was simply a little too inebriated. I felt guilty for previously being so creeped out by the husband. He had returned to his friendly self. In hindsight, I realized he was probably just relieved that we were going to bed early. "Don't be so sour," Stephen chuckled, hugging me from behind. I pushed him off, clambering into bed. "Wait, you're not seriously going to sleep, are you?" Stephen laughed, looking at his watch. "It's 9:14 p.m., Heather." "I'm respecting their one rule," I replied, tucking myself under the duvet. "Suit yourself," Stephen shrugged. "I'll just watch TV on the lowest volume and keep drinking." "Please get in bed," I requested. "I'm sure I'll pass out before midnight," he chuckled. "Don't worry, I won't get us into any trouble with the spooky owners." I don't remember falling asleep. What I do remember is waking up. That, in fact, is something I cannot forget. I opened my eyes. There was some sort of commotion outside the window. I checked the alarm clock on my bedside table. 4:07 in the morning. I had woken up too early. I had a vision of the terrifying old man. I pictured him charging into our room and butchering us in bed for disobeying his rule. "Stephen," I whispered into the darkness. He wasn't in bed. He wasn't in the armchair in front of the small TV. He wasn't anywhere in the room. I heard footsteps outside. Snow was crunching beneath feet. There was a muffled voice. It sounded like screaming. I scrambled out of bed and ran to the window, tearing the curtains open, and saw something that still haunts my every waking and sleeping hour. Wading through the snow, an 8-foot-tall abomination left a trail from the front door of the B&B. It was a hulking figure unlike any earthly creature I'd ever seen. Its skin was black. I still don't know whether I was more horrified by this monstrosity or the half-alive body of my cameraman that it was dragging through the snow. Stephen would have been able to see me standing in the window, but his eyelids appeared to be sewn shut. I realized his mouth was also sewn shut, which explained the muffled screams. He was missing all 4 of his limbs, but there was not a spot of blood on him. It seemed his limbless torso also had wounds neatly stitched up. The only mess he left behind was a yellow trail of urine. I clasped my hand to my mouth, futilely attempting to mute the sound of my tortured wail. It was no use. The creature stopped walking. Unclenching its right claw, the being dropped Stephen's near-lifeless body into the snow. The demonic creature slowly turned around to look at the window. Perhaps it had not even heard me. Perhaps it had just sensed that, like Stephen, I was not in bed. I had broken the rule. The being's face was crimson red and floated in the center of its pitch-black head. The thing had no eyes, but I know it saw everything. It somehow sensed I was awake. The creature's mouth was stretched into a wide, toothy grin that curved from one side of its face to the other. I unleashed a primal scream into the sweaty palm of my hand. My eyes swelled with tears as I stared into the featureless face of the thing I was sure would kill me. The being started to walk back towards the bed and breakfast. I leapt away from the curtains, tripping backwards over the bed. I needed to fall asleep, but I only had seconds to do so. Even if I hadn't been in a state of sheer panic, it would have been near impossible to achieve that. Suddenly, I had an idea. It was a bad idea, but it was the only option. I knew how to make sure I wouldn't be awake when the creature reached my room. I had to knock myself out. I could have held my breath, but that would have taken too long. I heard the front door of the building open. There were heavy footsteps on the creaky floorboards of the downstairs hallway. I did a dangerous thing. Obviously, it's not something I'd advise anyone else to do. I could hear the stairs creaking. The creature was getting closer. My heart was pounding. I hoped I would pass out from fear. I backed away from the window to get a running start. Then I sprinted towards it. At the last second, I lunged for the windowsill, ensuring that my head made contact with its sharp corner. When I woke, it was morning. It worked. My crazy plan worked. I was alive. I had an obscenely large lump on the side of my head, but I was alive. The bump didn't kill me, and the creature didn't kill me. I thought, for a fleeting moment, that the whole thing might have been a dream. But when I clambered to my feet, I received a horrifying confirmation of what had transpired during the early hours of the morning. There was a trail through the snow. It was the width of a human body. It led far from the village and vanished beyond the visible horizon. Stephen was gone. Merry Christmas. The somber voice came from behind me. I turned to face the old man who was standing in my open doorway. It was so many years ago, but I don't remember opening the door. Perhaps the creature entered my room. Perhaps it checked that I was not awake. I bought a bus ticket to Helsinki Airport, the old man said. Just one. I didn't say a word to the old couple. I left Stephen's things behind. I told our company that he went missing. There were search parties, police investigations, and so on. He was never found. 17 years later, I don't travel. I know I'm far away from Pulanka, but I still dream of that horrendous, red-faced creature. I fear Christmas, just as the old man did. I live in Los Angeles, but I still don't stay up past midnight on Christmas Day. Everyone who lives or has lived in the small town of Sparings knows about the events of the early years of the 2000s. Nobody talks about it, as not to bring back the trauma for those who were directly involved, but everyone knows. Everyone in Sparings knows about Santa Claus. No, not the red-cheeked, round, jolly man from the shows and stories. Not that Santa Claus. The Santa Claus who brutally murdered 6 children and attempted to murder a 7th. The first year, it was December 25, 2002. A child was discovered missing the morning of Christmas with a small gift-wrapped box on his bed. Inside, the police found a small, simple Christmas card that read, "Santa Claus is coming to town," with nothing else written in it. At first, no one really made a big deal about it. It was just some kid who had run away and left a strange note. Then, it happened again. 2003 Christmas Day. Another child goes missing with the same package and same note on their bed in the morning. This is when people began to get worried and the search got serious. Sparings isn't a large town. It has one main road that goes into and out of town and is surrounded by a forest. Any of the children could be anywhere in the huge mass of trees, so obviously that was where the search was mainly focused. But absolutely nothing showed up. There was no sign of them. When Christmas came around the next year, many children slept with their parents. Many people were scared that their child would be next. That year, 2004, not 1 but 2 children vanished. People panicked and the search efforts tripled. People from nearby towns came over just to help. But it didn't matter. No one found them. Nobody found any sign of any of the children. This went on for 2 more years. Each year at Christmas, a child would vanish without a trace, a small package with a store-bought card inside sitting on their bed. People would search for a few months before noticing that they wouldn't find anything. Police began patrolling the streets during the holiday season in Sparings. They would watch the houses just to make sure some psychopath wasn't breaking into a child's room. But they didn't help. Every year, someone disappeared just the same. Then came Christmas of 2007. I was lying in my bed, staring up at the ceiling when I heard something from outside my room. Thump, 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 footsteps, getting closer and closer. I began to panic, realizing what was happening. Thump, thump, thump. In my fear and panic, I completely froze. I didn't know what to do. I was only 10 at the time. I had no idea what I was supposed to do in this situation. The kids at my school had already been spreading rumors about what this guy actually was. A ghost, a demon, a psychopath. The latter was what everyone believed. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps were right outside my door. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard I felt as if it would burst out. Slowly, ever so slowly, my bedroom door creaked open. Thump, thump, thump. A shadow crossed over the dim light coming from the hall as the man stepped into my room. Then, in one swift motion, the man took 2 steps toward me and covered my mouth with a cloth. After a second, everything went completely dark and completely silent. I woke up in almost complete darkness. There was a stench all around me, a stench that I would only later realize was the smell of death and decay. A single window across the room from me let a few rays of dim moonlight shine through the room. The small amount of light glistened off of meat hooks attached to the ceiling, from which hung shapes which I could barely make out the edges of. My arms and legs were tied together, but I managed to use a nearby crate to stand up. My eyes were beginning to get used to the dark, allowing me to make out a metal door nearby with a small wired window at the top. I sat there in the dark for what seemed like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, with no sound other than my own heavy breathing. Eventually, I managed to tear the ropes holding me using the edges of the wooden crate. Then, there was a soft orange glow from the window on the metal door as a light behind it turned on. There was a soft click as a lock opened, and a metallic creaking and scraping sound as the door opened. A man's shadow, which wore a Santa hat, spread across the room as the light allowed me to see the true horror of the room I was in. All around me were chunks of meat, but not animal meat. I recognized a head sitting on the floor only a few feet away from where I had been standing for God knows how long. It was Susan Joran, one of the girls who had gone missing. There was a pool of dried blood around the dismembered head, and I immediately had to hold back the urge to throw up. The man, wearing a Santa hat and a red suit, walked into the room and looked around. I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't see me, but then I had an idea. The door was still open. The crate that I was behind was only a few feet from the door. The man was currently facing away from both me and the door. I sprinted for the door without thinking. I was out and into the open before the man turned and yelled at me. I didn't hear what he said, though, because my heart was still beating so loud, it drowned out everything but my breathing. I ran and ran through the woods, my legs burning, but I kept running. As the sun was beginning to rise over the trees, I reached the main road, which I recognized as the road that leads in and out of Sparings. Around noon, I made it back to my house. I cried and cried the entire way back, and didn't stop crying until my tear ducts were empty. Through my sobs, I managed to get out what had happened. My dad called the police while my mom comforted and hugged me. When the police arrived, I recounted my story again, this time slightly more calm. They left to where I said I thought the building was. The next day, the news had a story about it. My mom didn't let me see at the time, but I have recently searched up the article and read it. Apparently, the building was an abandoned butcher's shop. Inside were the mutilated corpses of every single child who had disappeared, some so rotten they could only be identified through their teeth. But that wasn't the worst part. In addition to that, all of the bodies had evidence of being eaten. Bite marks, flesh missing. The worst part of the whole thing was that after I ran, the man must have left. There was no sign of him anywhere near the building. That's what scares me most now. He could be anybody. No one knew who he was, maybe no one will ever know. He could be at your mall, just waiting, biding his time. You might know him. You might be friends with a cannibalistic psychopath. There's no way to know. Unless you just wait until Christmas Day, then you'll know. Just like I knew all those years ago. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.